essence. People, let's go to the last panel of this afternoon. Challenges, cybersecurity, and guiding principle for regulation. Here we have Ernesto Ibarra Sanchez, a big friend of the school for many years. He is very important in coordination and cybersecurity organization. Welcome. It is always our pleasure to have you here with us. He comes with three experts. Claudia Escoto Velasquez, co-founder of AMS and director of personal data protection for Info CDMX. Jonathan Lopez, legal defense manager and economic matters, privacy and telmex cybersecurity, and Daniela Ruiz Dominguez, director for cybersecurity and conventional weapons. Welcome all. And before you start, some of you have asked about the photographs. Are we going to have everything in a binder? Yes, someone is giving me a thumb up. Drive, and then you're going to be given the link. And this is, it would be useful if you could share it in the media and to say that you are wonderful and that we are wonderful as well. All yours. All yours, Ernesto. Thanks. Thanks, Olga, first for the invitation. Adrian, Oscar, the same. Here again, SSIG. It is a privilege. I clearly remember 2010, the first time when the school came to Mexico. And it was a great experience because at that moment we had, I think if we speak about regulation and cybersecurity, there are always challenges. But at that moment, it was a very interesting moment. There was more activity, more civil society and academia groups, and I believe the South School became to be a relevant player to bring political, academic, and private sector stakeholders, and a very enriching dialogue was created. And I believe this is one of the main qualities of the South School. And I would like, and that for those who are virtually, look at the enthusiasm of the in-person attendees. So let's give them a round of applause. Raise your hands, make a noise. Thanks. This capacity to be here in a hybrid model, we can go beyond time and space. So the energy we just sent to those who are online is a motivation for them to log in. So I would like to thank you, colleagues, those who accepted to participate in this panel. We will be speaking about the challenge of cybersecurity. Let's make an international tour, the global perspective, your own experience, and go deep into your areas of knowledge so that you can convey, speaking about internet governance, why is it that important to speak about cybersecurity and why it is a pillar for the different public policies for the different topics that can be subject to regulation, and how to use information technologies. And as you know, and this was precisely one of the things we said yesterday, we just celebrated the World Day of Telecommunications and the Society of Information, and 160 years of IP. It is a big excuse, a very important excuse. Let's start. Let's start with you, Daniela. Please speak about the perspectives, how you analyze challenges behind cybersecurity. Thanks to the Southern School for this invitation. I am always pleased to be back to tech. I am former tech and always having these opportunities and talk to the academic community in spaces like this. And I would like to tell you as well that my professional development since I graduated tech, it has been in international relationships. and it is a relationship between states. And this is very timely because, as you said, how young these conversations in general are, and in terms of cybersecurity. And this is not the exception to this rule if we take it to the international level. We're speaking about 25 years. This is the timeline. This is when this topic became important, the relationship among states and among countries. And I believe there are two elements to explain this. On the one hand, it is an additional domain where countries relate with each other, and we think about it as a domain that is impacting how countries, how the states make decisions. And of course, it is a domain that is not only limited to the talks, to the technical talks, or cords or cables. I believe it is something that is being affected, like international relationships, by international security dynamics, market dynamics, value chains, etc., etc. And this is what explains why it is important. And since we are among academics, just for you to have an idea, this talks started in the United Nations. We can identify the first resolution or the first conversations more or less in 1998. This is how diplomatic talks, and this is how everything started. But this is not the first time. The first organization and the first moment as such is at the beginning of the 90s, when the first was founded, which is the international organization that groups response centers of cyber incidents in the different countries. And this is to tell you that conversations started as a technical component, operational component. And there is progress, and as there is more dynamics in the cyberspace, it has opened a space of opportunity for those who do diplomacy, those who do international relationships. And to answer your question, Ernesto, what is the overview speaking about cybersecurity? From based on what I told you, well, I believe I can say that it is a very diverse setting in, and to speak about emerging threats and current threats during this 25 years. A very interesting number of threats have been identified, or cyber threats, and everything is related to the malicious use of digital technologies, the cyber space, and it is not an intrinsic threat to this area of development. And this is to have it in the radar and to bring it to the table. And in terms of international relationships, we are guiding and taking the multilateral conversations to that precisely. What is the meaning, what is the implication of a responsible behavior by the states in the cyberspace? And something important as well, I see in the public, a dear colleague of mine, cybercrime, and depending on the different players that we are that are interacting in the cyberspace, we can speak about public security, threats against public security, or threats that have to do with the national security, even for countries. So this is what I will say for this first intervention, Ernesto. And to continue with the talk, you can see how auto-regulation, self-regulation. She was given 8 minutes, but she self-regulated. What Daniela says to reinforce as Director of Cybersecurity and Conventional Weapons, it makes sense. and it is related to the profile and to the interest you have to do. Diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, and conflicts transcend the national scope, and it is very important to know that if there are no diplomats in your country, in the civil society and with the academia, we can push through conversations, through proposals, through initiatives, so that the countries in the region take this approach of diplomacy, so that it is possible to conceive internet governance and cybersecurity. And now, Claudia, Director of Personal Data of the in Mexico City, Info in Mexico City. Thanks, Ernesto. Thanks for the invitation to participate and South School. Thanks for allowing us to be with you. Challenges we have speaking about cybersecurity. It transcends the borders. But we have international and national challenges, the digital transformation we see worldwide. And I will be speaking about this exponential use of personal data with this wave of digital transformation and new technologies such as artificial intelligence that is being used by cyber criminals to create more sophisticated cyber attacks, to create phishing, more automated phishing, and to evade traditional security controls. Things that were more experienced and explicit. On the other hand, there is an international trend of ransomware as service, where the business model of ransomware has evolved to platforms that would allow players, even those with little technical experience, to do cyber attacks, and this is an interesting phenomenon. And attacks to supply chains as well. Attackers are looking for vulnerabilities in the vendors and in the software by third ones, and it will compromise security of organizations. Another important point globally is the deficit of professionals in this subject, and the regulation and the compliance of the standards, which is not consistent with the new technologies and AI, and there is a European regulation, but the implementation hasn't been easy, and it is not as effective till now, because Europe is making progress in its implementation, and we, on the other side, with the Latin American community, we see how the progress of this implementation. Another important global challenge to me is to balance technological innovation and protection of personal data and cybersecurity. We need to have this triad. Um, Cybersecurity is a big umbrella, but we should also consider protection of personal data. At the national level, I identify the lack of culture of cybersecurity. There is low level of awareness by the public organizations and also small and medium-sized companies. There is lack of risk, a perception of risk, and this is why those become perfect targets subject to be attacked. We also have the lack of regulation, and we haven't been able to properly identify what is a critical infrastructure in our country. The lack of legislation as well, it has affected. It is true that we have a framework of standards for personal data protection, but this regulation or the lack of a national strategy, it hasn't allowed to do this matching, and we do not know exactly which are going to be the roles and the responsibilities of all the players who are in that ecosystem. And this is why I believe it is very important. And at the level of a country, I underscore the relationship between privacy, cybersecurity, and protection of personal data. And this would allow us to promote and to strengthen this trend different, so that in the case of the incidents affecting personal data, to be analyzed by its impact and rights of people and the technical aspect. Of course, all incidents should have this approach, and if personal data are affected, let's do not forget that this is affecting rights and freedoms of people. And this is where I will end. Thanks, Claudia. And now let's speak about human rights privacy as one of the main elements of this governance, of this new way to coexist in internet, and how it is important that the internet governance perspective and the multi-stakeholder model is present since we first analyze the problem, how we will analyze it so that we can take better public policy actions, regulation actions, and even how to use data according to the law at the private sector. And with this approach of the private sector, I will now give the floor to Jonathan, who is the lawyer for a very important telecommunications firm, not only in Mexico, but also across the region. He's going to share his perspective with us. You have the floor. Thanks so much. Good afternoon. I am also a former tech student. I am so pleased to be at home. Look at the economic perspective and the perspective of companies. If we want to know about this, we need to learn it. We need to master it and see its scope. It is necessary to look at the history. And as Daniela said, this is a very old topic internationally in the United Nations. We started with a very relevant concern, which is to analyze the impact of telecommunications and technology in the context of disarmament and international security. At that moment, we knew that we needed to stop the use of technology to develop armament. As time went by, nations were facing different problems, and then we had terrorism. And now we analyze the impact of technologies and telecommunications in order to prevent terrorism, to avoid it. And then there was the Patriot Law in the United States, and progress at the international level. And then we faced a third moment. Once technologies democratized, telecommunications came to the most remote places, and now that all people have access to devices and internet at affordable prices, we are facing another problem, which is to study technologies and telecommunications and to analyze the impact when it is used to commit a crime. As time goes by, we've been facing this very different context. Barack Obama, when he made it to the U.S. President's office in May, he gave one of the best speeches, and he made reference to the following, very, very relevant. Cyberspace is not a place without a law, and it is not a place for only a few ones. In other words, we are all in the cyberspace. Secondly, cybersecurity is a matter of competitiveness and economic security of the United States. And according to my opinion, the one of all nations will depend on cybersecurity. Look, the year 2009 till today, what we are facing today, and the scope is very wide. Today, in regulatory terms, we are facing this asymmetric regulation. What does it mean? In some nations, we're still thinking to have basic tools as national strategies and as a basic framework of regulations, but in other places, the protectionism of the regulation of cybersecurity is being analyzed, or we analyze basic principles of cybersecurity applied to the outer space. And now international encounters, as Daniela said, cyberspace becomes a place for defense and to protect. Uh, in military terms, since it was recognized in 2011, and then NATO recognized this in 2009 and in 2011. And if we add this to the changes in generic definitions we have where we were first saying that information security is to guarantee availability, integrity, and confidentiality of information. And now we are facing bigger definitions where the European Union says, what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is do whatever is necessary to protect the network, to protect the systems, to protect the users, and whatever depends on them against cyber threats. And now my question to you is, what is necessary? What is what you mean by whatever is needed? This is it. What is the meaning of it?
Muchas gracias, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Estaba pensando justo este
I
término de
was
todo es
thinking about
necesario
this term, whatever is
y
needed.
vemos en la planeación del
And
panel
we
dos
have in this
diapositivas
panel two
hablando de
big
estos
blocks.
desafíos para
First,
poder
speaking
proponer
about
y
these
controlar
challenges,
todos
and
estos
then you
riesgos.
relate it to your specific profile,
Perspectiva de una
and
sociedad
to
comunitaria basada en
foresee
información
some
abierta.
opportunities for academic
Y
and
nos
professional
sugiere
connections.
proponer
And then
un
we
documento
are
que
going to
estamos
be speaking
trabajando
about
en
a
México,
document we
algunos
have in
parlamentarios que
Mexico,
están aquí en la mesa, en el auditorio,
and some of you
los que
have
nos acompañan en el
participated,
panel,
and
que
those who are
a
with me in
partir
the
de estos
panel.
desafíos
Based on
hemos
these challenges,
referido, a partir de las
based on the
participaciones de
participations
Jonathan, Daniel y
and through
Claudia,
Jonathan, Daniel, and
como ustedes
Claudia.
pueden ver, hay muchas
As
aristas
you
de la
can see, there are
y la
many
participación de
facets.
muchas
It
autoridades y
implies the
muchos sectores.
participation of many
Y ahora lo que les
authorities and
propongo es
players.
que abordemos estos desafíos
Now, let's take these
con la luz
challenges,
de
but
ciertos principios
in light of
rectores
some
en materia
guiding
de
principles,
legislación y
speaking
regulación de
about
ciberseguridad.
legislation and regulation
Sin
of
embargo, antes
cybersecurity.
de pasar a
And
esto,
before we go to
nos
that, and
escuchamos
since
unos y
we are
otros,
listening to each
quisiera
other,
pedirles que si
I would
pueden
like to
una
ask
copia
you
de
to,
de los
if
textos
you
que
have
presentamos
additional
nos
comments,
indicó, o
apart
están
from what
listos
we
para
have brought
pasar
to the
directamente al
table
siguiente bloque.
as the challenges, or are we ready to go to the next block? Good.
Para esto, vamos a
Now,
apoyar de la
we
tecnología
will be using
y hacemos
technology,
lo necesario para... Ahí está.
and let's do what is necessary.
Ya mencionaba Jonathan y
As
como sugiere
Jonathan,
también Daniel y Claudia,
Jonathan said,
hay unas
and
acciones
Daniel
que son
and Claudia,
necesarias para
there
que
are
los
actions
estados, las
necessary so
organizaciones y
that
sus
the states,
gobiernos aborden la ciberseguridad.
organizations,
En
tackle
el caso
cybersecurity
del país, del
in the
estado de
country, in
México,
the state,
tenemos
in a place like Mexico.
bueno, tenemos
We
ausencia de
have
una ley
the
de
lack of
ciberseguridad y
cybersecurity
tampoco tenemos
policy.
una
There is a
legislación.
lack, and we do not have a
Ahora
specific
aquí las preguntas,
legislation either.
¿necesitamos una
The
estrategia
questions
nacional
are,
de
do we
ciberseguridad?
need a
En
national
la región hay muchos
cybersecurity
países que ya
strategy?
cuentan
In
con
the
esta
region, there are
estrategia.
many countries with a
Levanten la
strategy.
mano aquellos de sus
Please raise
países
your
que ya
hand
tienen una
and
estrategia
tell me
nacional de
if in your
ciberseguridad.
country you have a national
Argentina, Chile,
cybersecurity
Colombia,
strategy.
Brasil,
Argentina, Chile,
El
Colombia,
Salvador,
Brazil, El
República
Salvador,
Dominicana.
Dominican Republic.
Si se dieron cuenta,
If you see,
y dado que representan
and
ustedes
since
una
you
mayor parte de la
represent
región, no todos los
the
países aún
region,
tienen una
not all
estrategia.
countries have
Tal vez
yet
para
a
muchos puede
strategy.
parecer un
It may be a
desconocimiento por la
surprise for you,
política
but
nacional de
Mexico doesn't have a
ciberseguridad o
national policy
estrategias
of
nacionales que
cybersecurity
aborden este
or
tema.
a national strategy addressing this topic.
En países como
In
Chile o
countries
Brasil
like
ya
Chile
tenemos
and
una
in Brazil,
legislación
we already have a
específica en materia
specific
de ciberseguridad.
legislation speaking
Otros
about
países están en ese
cybersecurity.
proceso de construcción.
Others are in the
Y les
process of
puedo decir, no
constructing
es
it. In
necesariamente
Mexico, we do not
malo,
have it.
pero es
It is
positivo
not
porque a
necessarily
través
bad,
de una
but it
legislación
is positive
promovemos
because through a
una
legislation, as
política
you can
pública
see in
con
the
más
image,
hincapié
it
a
is a
ser
public
regulatorio,
policy,
a
one arm,
legislación
and the
pública
legislation as
complementaria
a
que
complementing
inclusive
arm,
establezca normas
complementary, and it
definiendo los roles,
establishes
las responsabilidades y
governance,
las
and it
acciones
defines
para
roles,
que se cumpla
responsibilities,
con
and
esta ley.
actions to
Así
implement
que
the
desde este
public policy.
contexto
So,
inicial,
based on this assumption,
nosotros desde
we
la
will
Academia
start
Mexicana
this
de
project
Ciberseguridad
at
y
the Mexican Academy of
Desarrollo
Cybersecurity and Digital
una
Law,
iniciativa
and
que busca
in
contribuir a
the
desarrollar el
multi-stakeholder
diálogo y las discusiones
initiative
durante
that
temas de
addresses
ciberseguridad,
big topics
analizando
about
las distintas aristas
cybersecurity,
de la
analyzing
ciberseguridad
the different
desde el punto de
facets
vista
of
de la coordinación con
cybersecurity,
un enfoque
different
colaborativo
disciplines, and with a
para que
collaborative approach. And for you to see governance of internet and the guiding principles to legislate in cybersecurity. We will bring it to the table, and this was the collaborative process. Three fora: the first virtual, the second at the Senate, and the thirdly at the Ministry of Economy of the federal government. Now let's speak about the guiding principles. Speaking about cybersecurity, I do not know if you can read, but if not, do not worry, because our colleagues will explain from their perspective the importance of these principles. Daniela, Claudia, and then Jonathan. The same order, please. Good. And if I may, I would like to add to what Ernesto just said, speaking about documents or elements as a national cybersecurity strategy. This is not a conversation that comes from generous, spontaneous generation. This is a result of conversations, of the big conversations we have had in the last 25 years. Jonathan said a long time, and if we speak about international relationships, I can tell you that it is a short time thinking in entities such as the United Nations that has existed for 80 years. So it is a short time in which we've been discussing this. It is nothing minor, and I believe it is the opposite. We have more intense conversations, and there is a trend to be more complex. And this phenomenon that we have mentioned in other settings, technological convergence, artificial, generative AI, it is close to us, and the quantic computing conversations such as neural rights, etc., etc. And this is just for you to remember that it is not coming, it is not in the vacuum. These conversations are not in a vacuum. And to speak about the guiding principles of cybersecurity, I believe I will be speaking about three in specifically. I will be speaking about all of them, if it's okay with you. The second one you see in the screen is precisely the importance to speak when speaking about all these topics, to include gender perspective. And it explains, there is no other explanation. It is not possible to speak about cybersecurity and the construction of free, open, safe, inclusive cyberspace if we do not consider 50% of the population, period. And apart from speaking about gender perspective and the importance of having this element in the conversations when building guiding documents as a strategy, as a national cybersecurity strategy, I would also dare to bring to the table in a multi-diverse country like Mexico how important it is to include indigenous peoples, the inclusion, and how the interaction of the LGBTQ plus groups and the needs of more specific sectors and populations. I am speaking about children or elderly people, and depending on these sectors, you will see that they need different tools, they need different ways of uh, 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 bringing the rights to cyberspace, to be able to enforce rights in the cyberspace. And this is to speak about the first element precisely. And thinking about this element of gender perspective, and because after 25 years of conversations and multiple studies, etc., we know and we are aware, at least those who work in this field, we know that the way of interaction of the different communities in the cyberspace through digital technologies is different, and it will impact them differently to enjoy and to be able to enforce rights without infringing them online. This is an important element to have it in the radar. And of course, thinking about in multilateral terms and international terms, in the screen you see number 6. This is an element of international cooperation And if we think about this, states and countries are not alone in the cyberspace. We are in a collectiveness, consequently, in order to deal with the threats that we previously identified and in order to mitigate the threats that we'll face, well, we need to activate all these tools and these elements, which are international cooperation elements, not only to deal with, but also to work in more elemental topics, the creation of capacities, the exchange of information. What is what you see in your network, in your data traffic, something that can be useful to all of us as a group, and to create this concept in practice, cyber resilience. And apart from this topic, it is not only countries and governments talking to each other in an empty box, in a resonance. It is also, and this is precisely the 10th principle that you do not see in the screen, but Ernesto help us sharing the screen what others have mentioned in the document as collaboration with the ecosystem and information exchange. This is speaking about international relationships. This is normally known as this multi-stakeholder approach, the inclusion of the multiple stakeholders, the ones interested in the conversations, and it could also be the PPP, public-private partnerships, because here again, since this is a domain, a symmetric domain, well, not all countries necessarily, not all the states, or not all the national authorities will have all the information firsthand in order to face these threats. Many times we need to work with strategic partners in the academic and in the private sectors, those who are owners of the tools, of the hardware, in order to deal and to face these threats. And I believe here we know we have to recognize that there are differences of our population, and we need to also open these channels, dialogue channels, and we need to listen firsthand the needs of our population in the cyberspace and the relationship with the cyberspace, and to enable collaboration channels. Again, not only on countries, but with the whole ecosystem, with the digital ecosystem. Thanks so much. I would like to speak about some principles. These principles, it is a proposal. This is a strategy. It is a policy for cybersecurity in our country, and it has to consider the following. The first topic, the principle of protection of human rights, the principle of protection to privacy, protection of personal data, and also transparency and accountability. And we think that every legislative action and regulation has to respect these rights and freedoms of people, specifically the one of privacy, data protection, as well as freedom of speech and the right to non-discrimination. And as Daniela said, we should also remember how important it is not to exclude minorities, vulnerable people, children, and elderly people who are all part of this ecosystem. The next principle is the principle of digital sovereignty and data. Principle number 5, and here we are proposing we want the states to exercise this sovereignty, and in the case of Mexico, this authority and control over governance of data. As I said in the first comment, this digital transformation is going to take us to the digital transformation and quantum computing and AI, and to the exponential use of data, and this will be considered part of this digital sovereignty, and it cannot be seen without mechanisms that will foster innovation. Because when taking care and managing data, how come innovation is going to be limited? And we need to promote local talent. It is very important in our country to consider. We need to form, we need to educate the new professionals who are going to be part of this ecosystem, and they should also give solutions. And due to the geopolitical context we have today, this is an opportunity, an important opportunity for Mexico, like the nearshoring. It is partially moving, but it is also an opportunity, and the lack of talent in this field. It is something not on our side, and we should also have talent strengthening programs and the local entrepreneurship. Ernesto spoke about how important it is to promote the education of talent in a project very similar to the one of Costa Rica weeks ago in collaboration with the Organization of American States. The next point, number 7, a multi-sectorial participation and shared responsibility. As we have said, the design, the implementation, the review of public policies, the creation of legislations, of regulation, etc., etc. It has to include all the players, governments, regulating entities, the authorities, the private sector, the academia, the civil society, the technical community, because it is important to underscore that cybersecurity is not only an aspect to be technically addressed. As others have said, cybersecurity is something that belongs to all of us, and it crosses all people, and it crosses every organization. This is why this multiple stakeholder collaboration is important, and this effort by the Alliance, Safe Mexico, Mexico Seguro. Another point in point 7 is the principle of promotion of the culture of cybersecurity. And as we said, this has to include every level of the population, and it has to work with every discipline, because cybersecurity, at the beginning of the alliance, we had one psychologist, and she was asking if she had the opportunity to do something for the alliance. We convinced how important it was to have her collaboration, and we were sharing in CB experience with her in the 077. They have lawyers, they have every professional, and they have also counselors, because there are some reports and there are some calls, and initially this could be impacting people, specifically the emotional aspect. And this is where counselors or the psychologists are needed to do previous contention, and to then tell if there was a crime committed, and with a legal team. And we were talking to her about how important this is, and to never lose sight of your human being. And fortunately, she is doing awareness for people, speaking about cybersecurity. And we believe it is important to promote this concept of cybersecurity. Good. An aspect that we need to underscore as a topic that cybersecurity is that it is a technical thing by nature. What does it mean? That we need the best technical people. We are at a university, and we need to to use all the talent available domestically and internationally, so that all these experts in cybersecurity. And it is not only the technical aspect, we also need the best internationalists, psychologists, lawyers, and as Claudia said, the criteria to identify critical infrastructure sectors in the European Union. One criteria is to analyze the psychological impact of a cyber attack in a critical infrastructure. These topics need to be analyzed with the plurality of professionals. People we're working with are well educated people with certifications, with tools, with resources that will not only be operational in only one country but internationally. And then we need to observe what is the scope of the international enforcement, speaking about investigation of crimes, and speaking about the requirements to legislate is requirement number 3, which is the principle of risk management, resilience, and in continued improvement. Risk management is one of the more relevant topics, and it is very relevant if we cannot institutionalize cybersecurity. What does it mean? Let's have positions in companies as well as in the public sector specialized in cybersecurity, and as we have social communications and transparency and the legal department, we need to have all the specialized units. And resilience, it is a term that comes from psychology and the technology of materials, and each time an external force is applied, it will go back to its original position. We need to be resilient so that we can get ready and to know what to do in light of an incident and to mitigate impacts. Last but not least, continuous improvement. As we have technological progress and democratization of technology, we need to emphasize that. The next principle is the principle of protection of critical infrastructure and essential services. The criteria is critical infrastructure, and imagine mega installations of industrial plants like the ones of Iran. And the Stocknet example was given, and now the essential service. What do we mean by this? All those things which are essential for a state to work, and without it, you could paralyze the state activity. It can be the financial system, gas, dams, power, electricity, energy, and we will face different types of technologies, which are the operational technologies and the industrial control systems, which is what we call industrial cybersecurity, long-term cybersecurity. In the European Union, there are different criteria to identify them and to understand what is the best mechanism to establish a relationship with the private ones, because many of these services are operated by individuals. They are responsible for the operation of all of them. Then we have the principle of innovation and technological flexibility. This is relevant. What do we need to do from the legislative perspective and from the regulatory aspect? Why? Because the times to pass a law in every country is a very long time on one hand, and the regulatory aspect has to be delegated to a regulating agency that has experts on the subject with mechanisms that would allow them to fit the regulation to the requirements which are needed at that time. This is why laws should adapt this structure, organization model, who is going to be doing what, how they coordinate, and the technical aspect should be in the hands of technical people, always complying with the law. And then we have the technological neutrality. Today, with all these degrees, races for supremacy in the countries, there should be no provision that will establish a preference or present a restriction about the use of one specific technology or tool. And we need to analyze this from the perspective of what is our purpose. Why do we want to regulate? One of the ideas is that we need to, and we don't want the state to be paralyzed by, in case of a cyber attack. We don't want to see everything is suspended. And then to protect the information that is in the possession of authorities, imagine the financial system regulators, telecommunications, fintechs, etc. All the information of companies and to have what is to know what is the competitive position, and we need to protect the information of public servants. There are many activities, high risk activities, and even more within security problems where we need to protect information. And last but not least, digital trust. If we are in a route where there is no way back, where we want to digitalize everything, one of the aspects we need to guarantee is trust, trust in citizens. There we have the guiding principles to legislate and to regulate cybersecurity as a result of a collaborative process with many years behind, and summarizing regional efforts by the private sector, the academia, and the industry. And it is an effort that we bring to your consideration. The Cyber Secure Alliance and the Mexican Academy of Cybersecurity. And speaking about trust, which was the last word by Jonathan, remember that if you scan this QR, you're going to have the PDF of all the principles. And so for next week, you're going to see principles, and you're going to see the recommendations speaking about the national strategy of cybersecurity. We have 3 more minutes, so I will give you the microphone unless we have questions. But do you think if we have only 2 questions and then we make our closing remarks? There, who is raising their hands? There. Here we have another one. And what about here? Who wants to ask a question? Hi, good afternoon. I am Karina Abrego, and I come from Tech Campus, State of Mexico. I study engineering in computing technologies. My question is going to be short. It is just to have your opinion, because a few hours um, we were speaking about the Spain power outage, and some people thought it was a cyber attack, and there were others who took it as a failure, as a fail. And I would like to know your opinion. Jonathan, you were speaking about the industrial cybersecurity. How does it apply? And in general terms, what is your opinion with respect to that? And that's it. Thanks. Another question. And then we're going to answer all the questions. Is it a failure or is it a cyber attack? First of all, I would like to thank you for this very nice presentations by Ernesto, Claudia, Daniela, and Jonathan. My name is Stalin Vargas, and I am come from the Dominican Republic, and I work at the Ministry of the Interior and Police. My question is to Daniela. She spoke about cyber diplomacy. What has been the degree of adoption of cyber diplomacy by Latin American countries, and how this has strengthened or limited the level of communications and regional cooperation, speaking about these challenges of cyberspace? Interesting question, Daniela. One more. Do we have more questions? Hi, good afternoon. I have a question, a specific question for Jonathan, and another short question for all the panelists. Jonathan, you said shortly ago that the United States and other countries are making good progress and protectionism of the legislation in cybersecurity. I would like to know if you would like to speak more. And would you please explain that? And the question for all the panelists, if they want to answer. Shall we implement a cautionary principle when speaking about cybersecurity? As you know, Mexico is going through the transformation. Now government wants to have everything digital. We were also speaking about Java MX, where the information of almost all the population is available. Of course, there are some exceptions. People who do not have access to certain technologies, discriminatory. But yes, I want to know a little bit more about your opinion on this. Isn't it a high risk before having a clear regulation, well-established protection mechanisms? And if I am right, yesterday someone said that Latin America was receiving a year ago 500 million attacks and cyber attacks. 50% of them were attacks in Mexico. So it is a concern that we have all our digital information in light of these risks. I believe those are all the questions. Am I right?
Bien, pues pasamos a
Now
ahora con ustedes para que
let's go to
puedan
you
preguntarles
so that you can
alguna
answer
pregunta y
the
pues
questions,
para
Jonathan,
terminar esta
Gabriela, and
sesión
Claudia. And at the
damos
end of
un
your, at the end, I would like you to please make a final remark.
ahora sí me le toca abrirme, ¿verdad? Muy bien, el tema
Good.
de la
Speaking about
ciberseguridad
critical
es un tema bastante
infrastructure,
interesante
it is
porque
something very interesting.
porque se trata
Why?
de
Because it
tecnología
is a matter of technology
se
and
desarrolló
equipment
de manera muy
developed
específica para
specifically
tener ciertos tipos de
to
materia
be
o
with
ciertos
certain sectors and
procesos,
some
¿no?
industries
Por
and
ejemplo,
some
lo que se
processes.
desarrolló cerca de
Technology
los años
developed
70 y
during
los
the
años 80,
70s,
que eran
during the
ya
80s,
literalmente
which are
una supercomputadora,
customized,
una de las
tailor
características
suits
además de este
to
tipo de
operate. And one
computadoras
of the
era que no estaban
characteristics
conectadas
is
a
that
tecnologías de
they were
información
not
y de
connected
internet.
to internet or
Pero
to
por motivo
information
de los
technologies.
avances
But after
tecnológicos,
the
uno tiene
technological progress,
cierta integración de
there is an
tecnología con
integration
esta
of
tecnología de la
commercial
información, a
technology or
esta
information
tecnología de
technology
conectividad,
and
a
this
esta
technology
tecnología
with
privada.
connectivity to the
Esto
network, even
implica
if it
pues,
is
que sea
private. What is the
susceptible
implication?
de
Well,
vulnerarse por una
that it
amenaza
can be
cibernética.
affected by a cyber
Entonces, hoy en
threat.
día, como la mayoría de
Today,
los procesos integran
like
tecnologías de la información
since
y
most of the
comunicación y
processes have
conectividad,
communications and
significa
connectivity
que
and
sean
information
susceptibles
technology,
a ser
it,
atacados.
they can be
Bien,
attacked.
en el tema
Speaking about
que comentaba Miguel, del proteccionismo de la
protectionism,
legislación
the
norteamericana en
legislation
ciberseguridad,
or the regulation in
necesariamente debe de poner
cybersecurity,
este principio de
it has to
neutralidad.
do with the
¿Qué quiere
principle
decir
of
esto?
neutrality.
Una
What
nación
does
puede
it mean?
establecer
A
ciertos
nation
requisitos
can
para que un servicio
establish
extranjera
requirements and
pueda
then
prestar estos
a
servicios
foreign
en su
company is
país.
going to
Y
render
de
the
esta forma, pues
services
establecer
in the
ciertas
local
restricciones
country. And
a
in
estos
this way,
proveedores de
there are going to be
servicios,
restrictions
incluso desde la
imposed to the
perspectiva
service
comercial y
provider. And
económica,
from the
puede crear
perspective of
una
economic
distorsión del
competence,
mercado,
this
porque
could
aunque
affect
si
the
no dejas
market.
una
Why?
cierta
Because if
tecnología
you do not let
se pueda
one
prestar, es
technology
decir, que
to,
consuma de
for
manera
example,
libre y
if
no
it
bajo
is
precio,
there
ofrezca con cierta
freely and
capacidad
if it
de
offers
protección,
better
calidad,
protection
respuesta,
capacity, quality,
alcance, no
response,
solamente
and
estarías
scope,
limitando ese
then you will
beneficio de
only
la
be
tecnología
limiting
en
the benefit
particular.
of that
Entonces, este
technology. So
proteccionismo se
this
ve a la luz de
protectionism
cómo se está
is
desplegando
seen
precisamente
based on
la
how the
legislación en materia de
regulation is
seguridad de la
being
información y
designed, speaking
ciberseguridad
about
en cada
cybersecurity
país. Esto
in
solamente
each
tiene
country, and of course,
un componente
it
pues de
has
carácter internacional
international
principalmente.
component mainly.
Buenísimo, muchísimas gracias
Good.
por la
Thanks so
explicación.
much for
Me
your
gustaría primero
questions.
al planteamiento del
I
compañero
will
de
first
Colombia
speak
con el
about
tema de la
the question by
ciberdiplomacia.
Dominican
Usted diría
Republic
que
about
esto
cyber
de
diplomacy. I
ciberdiplomacia
would
se
say
da
that
simplemente desde
yes,
las
cyber
relaciones
diplomacy
internacionales
as a tool for
y
international
esto me refiero a
relationships
relaciones
is a
internacionales
relatively
con
new
más
tool.
países. Los países latinoamericanos y del
Fortunately,
Caribe
Latin
se pueden
American and
integrar en
Caribbean
nuestras
countries have
relaciones
been able to include
cotidianas.
this in our
Hoy por
daily
hoy, sobre
relationships.
todo como a partir de que el
I
efecto
can
de
tell you
esta
that
relación
today, in fact, it is an ultra
dinámica que tenemos
dynamic
con cada
relationship,
región,
the one we
en
have
dos líneas
with the whole
principales.
region.
Una, todos los
It is a
canales
two-way
técnicos y
relationship,
operativos,
technical and
digamos,
operational
por un lado, y por
channels
el otro,
in one
justamente los
direction, and
canales
on the other hand, we have
diplomáticos
the
propiamente.
diplomatic
Entonces,
channels. And
fue
so
una
it
pieza
is
fundamental que hemos logrado
this
en
joint
América
effort
Latina,
that we have made in
facilitar
Latin
precisamente
America,
estos
enabled
canales de
by
relación de Estados americanos
the
y muy
channels
por ello
of the
unido
Organization
pues
of
a otras
American States.
organizaciones, a otras
Other
alianzas internacionales,
alliances and
pero sin
organizations are not
marcar
excluded.
but it is here we see this the presence of this regional entity and Dominican Republic precisely together with Mexico. We are the only two countries in the region that have appointed one ambassador speaking about emerging technologies, and it is nothing minor if we speak about having relationships with other countries. As I visualize in practical terms, it is having like a new superpower in video games. And those who are video gamers, because it allows you to have a new level of interaction among the different countries, a new level of interaction. And this is very, very important. I am speaking about the international regulation. We should not forget, as Jonathan said, that at the end of the day, to speak about regulation in international terms, we can take two approaches: self regulation, mainly promoted by the United States, and two, a more regulating approach or more specific controls promoted mainly by the European bloc. And based on our understanding, it responds to the logic of the market and trade dynamics among the different countries. And initially, I said it when I was speaking about the integration of value chains, so we can identify the different regulatory approaches, the existing ones, and we could classify them in one or in another aspect. And on the other hand, we were speaking about the cautionary principle of having the adequate safeguards, and when including all this digital transformation and all this exacerbated use of digital means. And yes, of course, we have to think about this, but I would also call we need to become conscious users of technologies. We should not be managers of technologies. And this change in the user is nothing minor. We need to be responsible for our data, of our information, and what we are posting in our digital platforms and social media. Thanks. It is important, speaking about the cautionary principle, and I would like to emphasize how important it is in this wave of digital transformation. Of course, we have the principles, but from my perspective, there are two indispensable components: cybersecurity and protection of personal data, to have a regulatory framework, to have the match between cybersecurity and protection of personal data. Why? Because in these new tools that are created in order to render new services, to digitalize services, or to automate some processes, we could think about privacy and the design. And this privacy from its design would allow us, would facilitate our consciousness, awareness about the assessment of impact before having a relevant or intensive treatment of personal data. And if we add this to self-management, as Daniela said, it could build the digital trust as needed, because there's no way back. We are in this digital transformation a momentum, and we're going to be making progress with the use of neurotechnologies, as you said, the use of the metaverse. In other words, these are going to be technologies we will be familiarized with them, and to regulate this is complex, but I believe it would add to the vision that we could have precautionary measures and self-management, as Daniela said.
Excelente. Me gusta mucho, Sad, cuando cerramos con este enfoque, con
When
esta
we close with this
visión de confianza,
vision,
porque me parece que la confianza está en el
I
centro de las
believe trust
relaciones
is right at
humanas.
the center of human
Y les
relationships.
pido que hagamos un ejercicio de cierre,
Let's close. This is spontaneous, but let's be empathetic and do it. Please stand up. This is to close because a collaboration comes from collaboration, and then with collaboration, many things are going to be achieved. Now, the person to your right, please turn right.
Si no, quien está al lado de ustedes, ustedes
Or
están hacia allá.
if you have a neighbor,
Entonces,
you are going to
vamos a
be to
dar
the
la
right
mano.
of someone.
Se
So hold
arriman
your
y
hands,
se dan la mano.
and if it's okay with you, let's hug. Let's hug each other.
Sienten esa energía, es la
Do
energía
you
de la
feel this
colaboración.
energy? It is the energy of collaboration, the energy for trust, for a safer digital environment, to defend, to safeguard human rights. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.